Just saying hi, because we have time. Brian's in the washroom, and we're just waiting for the crowd to fill out. I think we had over, what, 300 and something RSVPs? I'm 18. I think we had like 340 RSVPs for today. But as with a lot of free events, half usually turn up. For paid events, I think we've been like 60-70% turn up rate for 10 ringgit. But yeah, we decided to make this free. So Brian is an old friend actually. I've known him since when he was 19 when he raised the 4 million funding. And a little fun fact, he was actually an advisor to my first company, City Pockets. So he actually owned shares in my company. And I was 27 when I started my company, he was 19. So can you imagine, he's this little kid, and he was advising me on how to do business. Which goes to the point where in the Valley, there's just no such thing as age, right? I don't look at you and say, hey, you're not qualified to tell me what to do. If you have your shit together and you know what you're talking about, then hey, I beg you, and I will go to you for advice. And he, at the time when my company was in New York, it was in Silicon Valley, and I was visiting the Valley and trying to get to know more people. So he introduced me to a bunch of this connection. Are you started?
Yeah, okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. You can eat.
No, I'm okay. What's going on, everyone? I haven't eaten for a while. Oh,
that's okay. We haven't really formally started yet.
That clock is not so wet.
Opening music. So it was going to be Brian giving like a 2-hour presentation, but I thought it would be more fun and engaging that I do a fireside chat with him to ask him questions. Also gives you an opportunity to ask questions. So we want this to be pretty casual. I think the most important thing is that we fully get the breadth of his sharing his experience.
Feedback.
Yeah. Is it from me?
I just took it off mute. Sorry, guys.
You wanted to finish up the hot hour?
I'm good.
But Brian does have a hot stop at 8 because he has to get back to his.
There's feedback. Can you? Oh, there you go. Hello. This is super sensitive, that's right. Do we need the microphone? Can you guys hear me? Yeah, screw this. Because you're recording it for the thing, right? You already have my recording one. Here you go. As long as you have the one for recording, right?
Is there an issue?
No, this one's for recording. So they already have that. That was just for amplification.
How come I don't have a recording?
Because they have two things, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just worried that there'll be more people coming in and not be able to hear.
I'm a loud kid.
Can the tech team please figure out a backup solution? Maybe a mic.
In the meantime.
In the meantime. So shall we get started? Because
let's do this. How's it going, everybody? Awesome. Yeah. Woo! I can't hear you. Yeah. Flying for 18 hours, so I need some energy from you guys.
Yeah, Brian has some business in Singapore, and I stole him to come to Malaysia. So he just got in a few hours ago. He's going to fly out again. So he has to leave the room at 8. So thank you, Brian, for coming, for making it. So I'll make the formal introduction so you have his background, right? So Brian is the co-founder and CEO of Kiip. It's pronounced as Kiip, K-I-I-P. It's a category-creating mobile rewards network that is redefining mobile advertising through an innovative platform that leverages moments of achievement in games and apps to simultaneously benefit users, developers, and advertisers. It's backed by American Express, Interpublic Group, Hummer Windlaw, Relay Ventures, True Ventures, Verizon Ventures, and others. The company has raised $15.4 million in funding to date. Kiip has been listed by Forbes as one of the 4 hot online ad companies to watch. Fast Company's 50 most innovative.
You can skip the rest.
Okay.
There's a lot of accolades.
Yes, a lot of awards. He was also called the youngest person to ever receive venture capital funding by CNBC and Wall Street Journal at what, 19? That was when I met you, kind of, right? Got his Bachelor's of Commerce from University of British Columbia at 18 after skipping 4 K-12 grades. We'll talk a bit more about that. He's been recognized by lots of different publications, including, I'll just mention, people should know what you achieved at this young age. You're how old now?
23.
23, oh, you're old now, geez.
I'm an old person.
Business Insider's top 25 under 25 in Silicon Valley, 30 under 30 in advertising, 18 most important people in mobile advertising, Forbes 30 under 30 3 times, geez. Mashable's top 5 entrepreneurs to watch, iMedia 25, and AdAge Creativity top 50. I need water. Before starting Kiip, Brian led key publisher and tech partnerships at social news website Date.com, where he accelerated the company's mobile presence by launching the Date Android mobile app. All right, cool. So that was a long list. I think at 23, I was like, I moved after college to Arizona, and I was like working at as a finance analyst. I didn't know what I was doing. And look at you at 23.
I still don't know what I'm doing.
Right? It's an ongoing process.
Exactly.
So let's see. I guess maybe in your own words, since it was a little tough to understand what Kiip does from reading all that, why don't you explain in your own words? What is Kiip about?
Yeah, so Kiip is really simple. It's first of all, I just want to say thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to meet all of you. And coming to Southeast Asia, and I'll explain in a bit why I'm actually here. 2 years, actually, so the quick background is I actually went on exchange to NUS for a semester back in 2008. So I fell in love with Southeast Asia then, came up to KL at least 5 or 6 times to get gum and you know, just things you couldn't find out in Singapore. But it was a great time, so I really enjoyed it. But yeah, so I'm happy to explain a bit about Kiip. So Kiip is, in essence, a rewards platform for apps. So we basically took what we call moments of achievement in gaming in the beginning. So this is when someone leveled up in a game or hit a high score. We kind of figured out that someone was actually doing something. They actually felt good. There was this dopamine rush, right? And we said in that moment, rather than having an ad show up, which is what everyone seems to be experiencing these days, we said, why not actually augment that feeling of happiness and reward you? So the concept came about where we would put a reward, a tangible reward in that moment of achievement. So imagine leveling up in a game and getting like a free latte from Starbucks. So that's kind of how the idea started. Now the way it's evolved, I'll talk a bit more, but now we kind of span all categories of apps. So imagine you're in a fitness app and you log a run. In that moment, you could potentially get rewarded by Gatorade. And we chose intentionally for the rewards to be serendipitous. So it wasn't something that you would expect. Because most rewards are like, hey, if you do all these things, then you'll get that. We said, hey, why not make it something where you're just doing what you're doing already, and this is more of like a surprise and delight. So we're going to use this as a new model to, again, help monetize apps and content, but doing it so that you as a consumer don't actually hate it. Because many of us find advertising intrusive and sometimes like a necessary evil, and I think that that was a weird dynamic, and if people hate something, why is it still there?
Yeah.
Because
advertising always has this bad word connotation to it.
Yeah. Why
so I
is
remember it was one time I was visiting Brian and stuff. I was still living in New York, and we were doing this ad with Kiip. Remember Kiip? Where it was, I think it was something like a Runkeeper app where you're running, and then all of a sudden you unlock this goal, and then by drinking water, you get a coupon from Vitamin Water. What I thought was interesting about that is you could get relevant advertisers to advertise for that specific app.
Exactly.
Right? So I like that part of it, and it made advertising cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So now that we know what Kiip is, I want to wind back into sort of who Brian is, sort of getting into his upbringing, and how did he even get to this point, right? So you're going back to your childhood, I guess. How was it growing up?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada. Go Canada! Yeah! Yeah, everyone loves Canadians, for now. So I grew up in Vancouver. My parents are actually from Hong Kong, that's why I look Asian. Yeah, and they moved over to Eastern Canada to a small city called Windsor, Ontario, which is across the bridge from Detroit. And now my parents, in case you're curious, my mom is a nurse and my dad is an accountant. So very normal jobs. In fact, they chose the most stable jobs they could find because, as immigrant parents, they said, hey, we'll make sure that, unemployment is not an issue, and of course, everyone's, going to need health care, and, everyone's going to need to still pay taxes, so those two jobs made a lot of sense. So they moved over to Vancouver in, I think, the late 80s, and my brother was born before me. He's 4 years older than me, and then I was born in 91, when the Soviet Union broke up. So I grew up in Vancouver, very comfortable city. My early days in technology came from actually gaming. So one of my favorite games to play was Counter-Strike Source. So for those of you who still play Counter-Strike, you are awesome. And I played sometimes 8 hours a day. It was pretty much an addiction. And I was at the top of my clan and at the top of our servers for at least, I think the streak was for like 3 months. But
and
then,
in school too?
Yeah, so that's a very great segue to part of my childhood, which was skipping grades. So I decided that school was a little too slow, primarily because there was a lot of repetition. And I didn't want to drop out. So I said, hey, why don't I figure out how to skip grades? So in the public education system in British Columbia, you have basically this rule where if you take an IQ test and you're past a certain IQ, they'll just let you skip. So they had a psychologist test me, and I think my IQ when I was in grade 1 was 156. And then that has declined to a lot. In fact, when you get older, your IQ is supposed to go down. So at the time, they were, oh yeah, you should skip to grade 3. So I skipped grade 3. Then I did a gifted program there where they kind of basically separate out gifted kids. And so gifted in many school systems is defined as special needs as well. So you pretty much like, yeah, it's kind of weird. We're special needs, yeah. So there's like, both opposite ends of the spectrum are both outliers, so they're both considered the same. It's really interesting. So I was going through these programs, and then I skipped grade 7, so I didn't really have a prom or like a graduation ceremony from elementary school. And so in Vancouver, you have elementary school and then high school. That's it. So K to 7, and then 8 to 12, and then you go to college. And then after I did 1 year of normal high school in grade 8. And I was proud that I never got shoved in a locker, which was great. So I was so if you're keeping track, when I was in grade 8, I was 11 years old. So normal age would be 13 going to grade 8. And then entered into a program that compressed 5 years of high school to 2 years, called the transition program. So I did that as well.
So were there other kids like younger?
Yeah. So a lot of times I spent a lot of time with other kids who were kind of identified as gifted and so I actually felt like I was the less intelligent of the group because a lot of them were very good at one specific thing. So some of the kids I was with would be like physics savants, where they would look at a problem and 30 seconds could solve the entire thing in their head. I would just be like, and I was pretty shitty at math. So
what was your special gift?
My gift, I think what I was good at was just generalizing, generally good at kind of everything overall. Like I wasn't like exceptionally good at one thing, I was just generally good, So that kind of let me understand things across the board a bit easier. And that kind of helped me dabble in a bunch of things kind of growing up. So anyway, so I'll skip ahead. So I graduated in 2004. I went to college then. I went to UBC, University of British Columbia, at the age of 14. So when you're that young, it's a bit interesting because I would kind of go and walk around the campus and people would stop me and go like, oh, are you looking for your dad? And like, and I had a student card, a UBC student card actually when I went into that accelerated program. So from the age of 12, I had a UBC library card. It was really interesting. But I remember loving college because of the flexibility it gave me, and I decided to choose to go into commerce, which is fancy colonial way of talking about business and commerce, sorry, in business administration. So I went to commerce faculty and then did a political science minor. But part of the other thing that I want to mention as part of my upbringing was I learned how to design Photoshop very early on. So I pirated Photoshop at the age of 11 because no one can afford Photoshop when you're 11 years old. And this was before they made it the subscription pricing model, so it was like $800 for a piece of software. So I pirated it, and it was great, and I learned how to design using tutorials online. And actually the first design I did was for these, I mean, this is super nerdy, so everyone in the room I'm assuming is nerdy, this is why you're here, but I designed SIGs for forums for people discussing Counter-Strike. So that's literally how I started designing.
So this is interesting.
Yeah.
So kind of, you mentioned that you were a hardcore gamer.
Yeah.
And that was your intro into tech,
Yeah.
right? And then you got into designing.
Because people were like, ooh, we want to design these like clan SIGs and stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, let's totally try it out. And I like, went into this this tutorial site called BlueSphere, and I learned how to design there.
Okay.
And so I literally started designing with that in mind. I didn't design because I wanted to be a designer. I just designed it because it was fun. And the other thing is too, my hand coordination was pretty shitty. So if I were to design with if I were to literally draw with my hand, it wouldn't look that good. So using software, it helped me stabilize my kind of pointer and like be able to make things I actually could visualize. So that's why I loved using Photoshop, because the things that I could see in my head, I actually could make it a reality using a controlled environment.
But did you teach yourself?
Yeah, I taught myself. So no, I never took a single class. So the funny thing about design too is my co-founder, his name is Amadeus, best name ever. He's an amazing designer. He's like he's a savant designer. He's that good. He used to observe me designing just back in the day.
Did you meet in college?
No. So I met him through my other co-founder, and this is how we started the company. But he would look at me and go, dude, you have the weirdest habits. Because I would do things with Photoshop to get something done through the weirdest way. It wasn't formally trained, because I would just figure it out. So I have like weird habits with Photoshop. Like I don't use rulers, for example. Or guides, sorry, I don't use guides, so they just eyeball. So it's just weird.
So did you is that your first entry into tech as a designer?
Yeah, so I started designing, and I met a friend of mine in university who knew how to do PHP and knew a bit of CSS as well, and HTML. I decided to learn a bit of CSS and HTML because he kind of wanted to specialize in just, back end.
Yeah.
And so we ended up teaming up, and we started our first web design company together.
And this is in college? This
was in college. And the way I started it actually was because I had a lot of free time, not because of the fact that I had skipped and everything, but because of a sports injury. So another fun tidbit is that I used to play ice hockey. I know it's hard to believe. I used to be really buff. Always skinny. I know, right? I was like, yeah. I was actually usually the guy who would dodge all the hits, right? And then unfortunately there was this one hit when I was 16 that I didn't dodge, and it was a knee-on-knee hit. And I fractured my lower femur, which is not a bone you're supposed to break. So I ended up in a wheelchair for a few weeks and then in crutches for 4 months. And you kind of have three choices when you're immobile, right? One is you can play a lot of games, which I already knew how to do. Second was watch a lot of porn, or start a company. So I decided, yeah, it's like, which one? So I decided to start a company. And that was when I teamed up with Kenley to build the web design agency. So we called it a design consultancy, not a web design company, because when you say consulting, you can usually charge like 10 times more. So we're like, it's gonna be a design consultancy. And we started with small businesses, friends, contacts, things like that. And that's kind of how I started to learn how to work with clients and get into the hang of just, we had a bunch of contractors. I think we had like 2 full-time employees. It was pretty cool. And then that became the funding source for what was my, what I call a travel fund. So we set aside some money, all of us as co-founders, to this thing we call a travel fund. And we knew that when we graduated, we wouldn't, I knew that I wouldn't go immediately into a job. I wanted to travel. So by the time I graduated in 2009, conveniently the year before was the big financial crisis. So there wasn't a lot of jobs available. So I took marketing as a major, and I don't know if it's the same here, but out of all the hardcore business majors, that's like kind of the easiest one to get into. And I kind of chose it because there's also a lot of girls in it, because it was a very generous gender ratio. So decided to go into marketing, and the sexy jobs out of marketing are brand manager, right, or advertising executive. And so I decided to apply to some of those jobs coming out of college. And the first offer I got was a unpaid internship at an advertising agency. And I said, I don't want to do that. And so I decided to go traveling. And so that's when I took a bit of a gap. I took 6 months to go traveling. And that's when I went all over. I went to Australia, I went to Europe. It was a great time.
So this is, so you mentioned earlier that you went to NUS to do it abroad. So this is before you graduated?
No, so NUS was before I graduated. That was in 2008.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I chose to go on exchange because I, again, had very traditional Asian parents, so they shelter you, they smother you, they're helicopter parents, they want to make sure you're always busy and doing things that are studious and contributing to your knowledge. And I said, you know what, I'm going to try to figure out a way to get away, and an exchange was the most safe way to do that, really. And I chose the furthest destination, which is like all the way across the planet in Singapore, and it's because the only second language I can speak is Cantonese, but it's only enough to be dangerous at a dim sum restaurant, not actually to be fluent. So I said, well, I'm going to go to Asia because I wanted to learn more about my people, And so I chose Singapore. I chose Singapore because they spoke English, and I was like, well, this is great, so I can at least communicate when I land. But then I very quickly realized when I landed that they don't actually speak English either. It's like this Singlish. And I remember just the first week was like, can you repeat that? I still don't know what you're saying. But it was so fun, and I had a great time. Because the one thing that Singapore taught me, and it's one thing I really hope a lot of you have experienced at least by now, which was every weekend we could just hop on a plane and go anywhere in Southeast Asia within an hour. And these were exotic places that when you grew up in North America, you would always fantasize about, whether it be Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia.
You already know that here.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that. And so the thing I learned from exchange was the feeling of adventure and knowing that you could go anywhere you wanted, kind of whenever. And obviously I had the right platform for that because this exchange, it was pass-fail. So, as long as I got 51.
6 months?
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah, I was like, as long as I got 51, I'm good.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it sounds like throughout your whole childhood upbringing and high school, college, you had a lot somewhat accidental, occurrences that led you to design, led you to building a consulting company, whatnot. Yeah. Are there any other factors that we should know that kind of influence your eventual entrepreneurial journey?
So there's one thing I've learned from hiring great salespeople, is that there's one theme that seems to perpetuate across the folks that are really effective, and that is that they all did improv in high school. So I actually didn't do improv. I did this thing called speech arts, which is like a mix between improv and drama. So you would have to recite poetry in front of a giant group of people and then get adjudicated. And so you'd have to memorize sometimes what would be like 5 to 10 minutes worth of poetry. And then sometimes even do Shakespeare sketches and stuff, and literally memorize lines from Puck and a few other characters in Macbeth. So that was another thing that my parents got me into for some reason. And then the reason why I even did that in the first place was because the elementary school that I went to in grades 1 to 3 was a private school that had a very strict program around something like that. And the teachers for that wanted to bring me in because they saw me and my brother as my brother and I as a potential challenge, because my parents aren't native English speakers. So they said, could we, sort of have you come out of the program with absolutely no accent whatsoever? So that was our number one goal. Yeah. So as a result, I now sound like I'm from Washington, right? And so I was like, great. So that's one formative experience, and the fact that they had you reciting pages and pages of poetry helped tune my memory. And also helped me feel comfortable in front of big audiences. So being an entrepreneur, especially when you're pitching and you're recruiting and you're selling, you have to have some of these skills mixed together. So the funny thing is, in hindsight, I realized that these all kind of came together to help me. But at the time, you're like, oh, why are my parents forcing me to do this, Yeah. And so I'm sure a lot of you have realized that the little things that you grew up with, and some of you might not even know this yet, one of the things that I always try to ask people to dig up from their past is like, what is that superpower or that strength that you have that came from just formative experiences while you were growing up? Those who are able to identify that and refine it and make it a great skill are the ones that eventually are able to succeed.
That's such a good point, because I actually can relate to that. When I was little, because Asian parents, again, want their kids to focus on academics, but my parents would like go out and sell stuff, so I was knocking on people's doors, doing door-to-door sales when I was like 14, 15. I went to the flea market, opened shop, so I learned the art of selling there as well. And I did a bunch of Toastmasters, public speaking. So I think selling is a skill.
Yeah,
it's
so
a common theme.
Anyone I see that's good at selling either did public speaking or improv or whatever.
Yeah. So, just curious, how many of you did that here? Any form of public speaking or like stuff where you have to go out and do drama or whatever?
Yeah.
So just
you guys are good.
It's not too late. I think you can still do it. And I knew I hated public speaking. I sucked at it. I still do. Every time I would force myself to come out and speak, I was like, I'm going to go out and volunteer, right? Also curious, for our benefit, people in the audience, how many of you are actually running startups right now, full-time? You have your own company. Okay, that's half of the crowd. How many of you are still working in a full-time job, but thinking about startups? Okay. How many of you are students? Okay, and everyone else? What is it going to be?
AKA, what are you doing here?
I'm a bit more polite, I guess. Cool. So, all right. So talk more about Kiip then. So how from that first non-paid advertising job, how did you get to it? Maybe you want to talk about Dig and how did you get to Kiip?
Yeah. So the way I graduated, took 6 months to go travel and fuck around, and then I went to. I wanted to visit the States because I had never been to New York or San Francisco or LA until I was 17 or 18 at the time. So I traveled to these cities, and what I did was I cold emailed every cool person in tech that I wanted to meet. So I guessed their emails, and some of you might know my email guessing trick.
Oh, I love this trick. He taught me this early on for the art of cold emailing. Have you guys heard of this before?
I'll share.
Okay,
so for those who don't know, so basically you want to reach anyone, you know their first name and last name and the company. You basically put your best guess for their email in the to field, and then every other iteration you think of in the BCC field. Because when you send it, at least they don't think you're that desperate that you guess like 7 different versions of their email, and it's all hidden in the BCC field, right? So they have no idea, and then the email just gets them, and then you'll see the bounces of all the formats that didn't work. So then once you know the right format, then you can use it for every other employee of that company. So it's fantastic.
Yeah,
so
I've tried this before.
It's great. So I use that to go after practically any interesting investor or founder that I could find. And at the time, I also randomly created this app called, it wasn't a mobile app, it was just a web app called Follow Formation, and it was basically a tool to help you follow big groups of Twitter users at once. So it quickly amassed a following because it was basically all the guys that wanted to auto-follow like thousands of people to get followers back used it a lot. So we had a lot of spammers using. I didn't intend for that to happen, but that's eventually what happened. Now it started to get kind of big-ish. So we had like 100,000 visitors, and so I used that as a way to get to these people. Because when you cold email someone and you're just like, hey, I'm just some person, and I want to meet with you. They're just like, well, why the fuck would I want to meet with you? So you basically give them a reason. You kind of make up some reason. So I think a lot of us forget about the power of sort of branding for the sake of branding. So either you have a side project or a company or something you started off with, just starting to build. You want to give it a package. You want to call it something and say, I'm working on this thing. So at least you validate that you're creating something. And people respect creators and builders and someone's actually doing something, even if it's just in its early stages. And I use that to kind of get as hey, I want advice on follow formation, how to grow our user base and the future of sort of social media discovery, content discovery. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Let's meet up for like 15, 30 minutes. I remember very distinctly one of the first meetings I had in New York was with the guy from Union Square Ventures, Fred Wilson. And he was very well known at the time. His blog was super, AVC, you guys have heard of it. He literally put a clock in front of me that was 15 minutes and counting, literally. So he started it when we first started, and the meeting ended up lasting 45 minutes. So that was a very fascinating experience. So again, I cold emailed a bunch of people, and then I ended up meeting with an entrepreneur in New York. This is how life works. Like, I'm gonna tell you a bunch of things that's just gonna make you guys go, huh. So in New York, I met this guy, nothing significant now, but he offered me a job in New York. And then I met up with an entrepreneur in LA, and then I also met up with a couple companies in San Francisco. One was Dig, and the other was an agency called AKQA. Some of you might have heard of it. So in LA, I met with a fellow by the name of Sean Rad. And Sean Rad, at the time, had started a company called Adly. And I was like a sponsored tweets for celebrities. So you basically pay a very popular celebrity to tweet on your behalf. That was his company. But now Sean is actually known for being the founder and CEO of Tinder. And so Sean and I actually became good friends, and so this is how life works. So here's the thing. So I ended up I ended up also meeting up with Matt Van Horn, who at the time was the business development manager at Dig. And I had actually emailed originally the VP of Biz Dev. His name is Bob Book. And he passed me off to Matt. He said, hey, go grab breakfast with Matt when you're in town. Matt made me come up for breakfast at like 6:30 a.m., some ungodly early time. And he said later on, he's like, to test if you could like wake up and like devote yourself. And I was like, okay, fine. And I grabbed breakfast with him. After the breakfast, he drove me straight over to the Dig offices, and then he introduced me to Jay Adelson, who was the CEO at the time. Within a month, I got a job offer. And then 2 months later, got the visa. Because as a Canadian, I still have to deal with visa issues too. So for those of you who are grappling with that, I feel your pain. Being Canadian doesn't give me any extra special rights going into the US, unless it's a TN visa. But my degree is in business, so the only thing I could have gone under for TN was consultant, but that was a little like broad and gray area, so they said, we're gonna apply for your H-1B. So I went through a full H-1B process, which just took really long. And so I finally moved down to San Francisco in January of 2010, and I was at Dig for 5 months, and then I got laid off in May. You're like, oh, how did you lose your job so fast? So I'll explain. It wasn't because I was shitty at my job, at least I don't think so. But Dig at the time was going through some issues. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Dig, Dig is basically Reddit, and at the time they were neck and neck. Right? And Dig actually was bigger than Reddit at a certain point. And at its peak, Dig had raised $40 million and had 115 employees. And I was the 115th employee. And very quickly, 5 months in, they became 80, then 60, then everything disappeared. So I was in that first round of layoffs. So I lost my job in May, so that made me lose my visa. So I lost my visa at the time. And so I went back home. And again, because my only professional network was in Silicon Valley, because I'd really not networked in Vancouver for the sake of a job, it was always down in San Francisco, I decided to go back down as a tourist and interviewed with a bunch of companies. So I interviewed with a company called Urban Airship. Some of you might have heard of it. Another one called Kissmetrics. So a couple companies that have, again, now become quite big. And it just so happened that those two companies were funded by one VC that ended up being my seed investor, which is True Ventures. So again, all this is serendipity. You'll get a theme throughout this whole conversation.
Serendipity,
yeah.
However, if you notice, he hustled. He cold emailed a bunch of people. You know, he went 6:30 a.m. and met that VC. So he might say, oh, it's luck, blah, blah, blah. But you know, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Right?
The serendipitous events happened. So like I ended up, so Scott Kveton was the CEO and founder at Urban Airship at the time. And so I actually got the idea for Kiip after I was laid off. It was because I was on a plane, I saw people playing games. I said, why are there so many people playing mobile games? I want in on that. And then I realized that I wasn't a game designer very quickly. And went, well, maybe I should do something that I actually understand, which is advertising, because I had studied a bit of it. Now then I quickly realized I didn't understand anything, because what you learn in school versus the reality of the advertising industry is completely different. I got thrown into the bowels of this ridiculous industry. Advertising is a fucked up industry, right? It's crazy. So I got the first idea through that experience. And then the way I got my co-founder, so this is helpful for some of you. Like I didn't go to like a founder dating service or like I know it sounds kind of sexual. It's the same thing. I don't know if they have that here, but it's
Tinder for
yeah. They should actually. It's a good idea. But without the whole hooking up. Yeah. So you can hook up to create a startup. So my one of my co-founders was the engineer that I worked the closest with at Dig. So we did a deal with some company at Dig, and we needed to do some analytics in the window that would come up for the Dig button, whatever. And he was the engineer that I partnered with to create. And so we got familiar with working with each other. And then he actually had left. So here's where it gets awesome. He left a month before I got laid off to start his own company. And it was actually a game. He wanted to create a games company, and he had this game he already designed called Schemo. And then I didn't leave. I got laid off. I forcefully left, and then I got the idea for rewarding in these games, but any game. So plug in to go to any game. And so we met up one day, and I was like, I got this idea to reward any game. Well, I got this idea to put rewards in my own game. I was like, well, do you want to do rewards in any game versus just your game? He's like, that's pretty awesome. And so I ended up bribing him with beer and pho, and that's how we started building the first prototype. And then he brought in his best friend who happened to be in San Francisco, who happened to be a great designer, Amadeus. And us three of us, we started building out the prototype. And then how I initially read True Ventures was because Heaton Shaw from Kissmetrics and Scott Caviton from Urban Airship both decided to not hire me and decided to introduce me to True Ventures instead. So this is also the reason why I owe so much to them too, because they said they could have easily been selfish and said, you know what, I was going to hire you as a business development manager, and instead they said, you know what, I don't think you're employable, so you can go talk to the VC. And I pitched True Ventures, and it wasn't really a formal pitch. It was like, I was like wearing a hoodie, and I was, everyone wearing hoodies, but I was, sitting there going, well, here's this idea. The company's not even incorporated.
So it was just an idea.
Well, I had the mock-up. So this is the other thing too. So as a designer, one of the things you get to do is you get to make something look like it's a final product.
Fake it.
Yeah. So I was like, look, you can tap on it. It created a fake coupon, and it was like it worked. Not really. It wasn't actually functional. But at least I was like, look, check it out. It actually does something. And they go, whoa. And then, a lot of it in the beginning is they don't want to see, they want to fall in love with the idea conceptually very quickly. And having it in a full working, super polished format is actually not necessarily the best thing in the beginning because they know you're going to change it.
Yeah. Cool. So was that how you land your first investor? Yeah.
So True came in.
How much?
We raised $300K the first round, and it was for a pretty big chunk of the company because but I think at 19, this is the most money I'd ever seen in my life, right?
So tell me more about that because I think in Asia specifically, I built my company in New York, and comparing New York and Silicon Valley, we get killed on valuations too because all of them come from financial backgrounds, and we're noticing that in Asia too. A lot of new VCs are coming from like PE sector, and they want half of your company for giving you a little bit of money.
Well, here's my pushback for that, and I think this is why True Ventures has been well known for having a very founder-friendly philosophy, is if you are such a tiger investor, you go in and you're trying to gobble up so much of a company, you're leaving not enough of an incentive for the founders to actually put their heart and soul into it. So it's strategic to not buy that big of a chunk. So they did just enough for us to obviously feel like we still own enough that we were reaping the benefits, right? And that's one thing that actually drove me into entrepreneurship in the first place is remember I got laid off, and it was because of mistakes that I never made, right? And so I kind of made this pact to myself. I was like, from now on, I'm gonna do something where I'm responsible for everything. Because if I make a mistake, I pay the consequences, or pay the price. If I succeed, I get the benefits, right? And that's one of the big things about entrepreneurship. It's so rewarding, right? But it's also frightening because, if you fuck up, you're the one, there's no one else to blame, right? You're the one who screwed up.
So I think two lessons here quickly on funding. One is that if a VC wants to take more than they may deserve, push back and say, hey, you need to incentivize me to work on this project for the next 5 to 10 years, right? And two is, I always think that it's okay to if you have no choice, it's better to own a small piece of a big thing than a big thing of nothing, right?
Exactly.
Cool. So tell us more about from then on. Like, what are some of the biggest ups and downs? You went on to raise like $4 million, is that right?
Yeah.
As your Series A.
Yeah.
And then tell us more about that whole process of starting the company, ups and downs, big lessons learned.
Yeah. So the big lesson was that gaming was very limiting. So we started off with games because it was the easiest way to explain the achievement moment, right? Like the moment I say achievements in games, everyone gets it. If you're at least fun as a person. Some people were like, "Oh, I don't want to play games," and I'm like, "Let me see your phone." And I look at their phone, like, "What the fuck is this?" So it is solitaire. They go, "Well, that's not a game." I'm like, "Solitaire's a fucking game." So they don't really get gaming that way. They don't think of it as a game. It's like, and I'm like. And then some of them have Blackberries, and you're like, you know, do you play, what is that?
Steak.
Steak, yeah. So, or that other one. Yeah. Or no, there's whatever you call it. Who uses it? Come on, you guys know what it's called.
Blackberry.
The ball where you're hitting all the blocks. Brick.
Pong.
Actually, the consultants.
Yeah, whatever. Come on. Anyways, so gaming was limited because brands wouldn't feel like they were targeting gamers, right? So if you go after like a Pepsi, for example, which was one of our first clients, Mountain Dew was a great brand that they thought would align towards the gamer, right? But but then I was like, well, but you have to understand, like everyone plays games these days, right? Like from the professional to a mom to you name it, and so they didn't really get that. So in order to explain that, we ended up working with other types of apps. So it was actually Pepsi that ended up. One of the folks that worked at their agency, this guy named Chris Blumberg, came to me and said, "Hey, I know we're doing a gaming thing, but aren't there technically achievement moments in fitness apps?" So he's like, "Well, why don't you go find some fitness apps and maybe we'll test it out with you." So we found a fitness app called Map My Fitness, and we ended up integrating into them for a hot minute, and then we ran a big Gatorade campaign, and that is what validated fitness. So by doing that, we used that as a case study to go in other brands that didn't think that they were going after gamers, and they went, "Oh, you do fitness too? I get it now." So there's like other things that you do than just gaming. And then we'd go after we sold them on fitness, and we go, "Oh, what about this gaming thing? Oh yeah, that's interesting." So we kind of like use like the whole Jedi mind trick to like get them to do the fitness thing, and then go back into the original fucking thing that I was pitching them in the first place. You know, so it was very interesting just to use it to paint that picture. So yeah.
So tell me more about, because it's always the first one that's the hardest to get. Like, so I'm really curious about how do you get your first client to even trial with you?
Yeah, so our first customer was vitamin water, and our second customer was Pop Chips, right? And Pop Chips is a rapidly growing chip brand in the US. It's like these pressure cooked chips, and it was an entrepreneur that started. Now, it just so happens that one of the first, two of our angel investors in our first round was the CMO of Vitamin Water and the founder and CEO of Pop Chips. So this is another thing. So
did you strategically get them as angel investors?
Yeah. No, not just for the customers. They just happen to invest. And here's another story.
But you didn't.
I met the CMO of Vitamin Water at a party at South by. We were both like, I was underage and not supposed to be drinking, but we were both pretty buzzed.
This is South by Southwest,
Yeah.
the annual conference in Austin, Texas.
Yeah. And so I ended up meeting Rohan there, and he's like, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, I got a really good friend of mine, Kiip, who's the founder of Pop Chips. If you're raising money, why don't we both invest?" So they just both, again, serendipitously invested. And so when we first launched, I was like, well, we need our first two customers. So I just called them up. They're like, "Yeah, we'll just try like a 5K, 10K."
So you were in Austin. You were kind of drunk. You met these guys. You pitched them on the spot.
This was even before I started Kiip. I met Rohan when I was at Dig and I was at South by. So I didn't pitch him anything the first time. It was just hanging out, you know. And then he kept the connection going. But the thing about this, and one thing that I remember talking to some of your companies at MaGIC earlier today, was that you should leverage nepotism and favoritism as your first customers, because at the end of the day, they're not buying from you rationally. Like no one will go, "Ooh, that's a tiny company with 3 people in it, with massive security holes and 0 validation. Let me spend money on you," right? Like that's just not going to happen. So they're buying from you because they believe in you, and they like you. It's definitely for personal reasons. It's not just because of your product. So the product is just the icing on the cake. They want to feel like they're buying into the vision. So you should leverage that in the beginning, and don't feel bad doing that. But make sure that you follow through and you do well for them, right? Because you're only going to have so many bullets in the beginning, and once you use them all, you're kind of screwed. So you should at least make sure you deliver well on most of the customers you bring in the beginning.
So it's almost like one of the secret superpowers that everyone should have as an entrepreneur is to be likable.
Yeah.
Right? How do you become likable?
Well, that's not it. So again, likable is like one of those things, like being an entrepreneur, where you don't like wake up in the morning and go, "I'm going to be likable." You know? And then I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. That's the other thing. Like, you don't just walk out of a door and go, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur today. It's all about kind of, you look at what you did in the past and then you identify that as an entrepreneurial thing, you know what I mean? So I highly encourage all of you, like, you know, your original intention, especially when you're trying to be an entrepreneur or want to do something that's creative, is not about being an entrepreneur, but about creating something from scratch. And about taking something that was in your head and making it a reality. It's that simple. And so that's how you be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And then likable, I think, honestly, there's very simple things like smile. Like, you know, it's seriously simple.
But that's not enough, though. There must be something. Well, how do you get people to
I want to give something that everyone can do, right? Because I think, smiling is more like a metaphor as well for kind of people want to be around people who are generally positive and have a positive spin on everything, just have a lot of energy. So it's just, those are the things that I noticed that kind of weave all of us entrepreneurs together, is that we kind of have this addicting energy around, and like it's just like, and then it's almost like, and you probably noticed this now because you can when you have a little bit more time to think about who you are and have this introspection. A lot of it is, people will be around you and be like, why the hell are you so happy about this shit? There must be something you're doing, right, that is making you excited about this idea. So that's why being so excited about something is a great way to attract people to want to work with you and build a company with you, because the first reaction goes, why are they so excited about this? There must be something there. Because if you're not excited, like, why would someone even bother being a part of it?
So that's a great thing. I always think, I don't know if this is your superpower, but I always think Brian's one superpower. He taught me this other lesson, that each founder on your team should have one superpower, and you need to identify what it is, right? And your superpower is like the ability to sell, just to anyone, clients, employees, investors. So what is that art? Because I think in Malaysia, it's funny because I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, and they can build a really good product and technology, but maybe there is a bit of a gap in terms of how do they sell the vision. So can you give us a few tips on what is the best tip or tip to sell?
Well, the first tip, and it's okay because you're identifying what I'm doing, but is really not to sell and not to pitch. It's like these are not the droids you're looking for type of thing. Because you want so one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten is instead of if you ask for money you get advice, if you ask for advice you get money. So a lot of it is the more you involve someone, the more you help them feel like they're investing in you, the more you actually could potentially quote unquote sell them or pitch them, because it's almost like when you're asking a girl out, right? Or you're interested in this cute girl, you're not going to go straight for the jugular. Do you want to be a wife? Right? It doesn't work that way. It'll immediately turn her off. So you want to start off easy. You want to, again, ease into it. But it's always this game of when do you convert, right? Because you could do too long where then she goes like, what are you trying to do? Okay, I'm going to friend zone you. And then you're fucked. Right? So you're like, how long do you have? Right?
This is personal and professional.
How long do you have until you get friend zoned, right? And it's exactly the same with pretty much every situation where they're going to invest in you or whatever. So it's like figuring out that period of time. But everyone has their own tempo as well.
Yeah.
And one way to figure this out too is to understand their history, right? So if you look at other people, how have they interacted with the founders that they've invested in? What are they looking for? Why are they excited? What drives them, right? Because if you know someone is purely an investor that invests on vision, and you go into the meeting and you just describe every little detail of your product, they're going to get bored out of their mind, right? So in some cases, it's actually better to be simple, right off the bat, right? Keep it very deceptively simple, and then if they want you to go into the detail, then you will.
Yeah. So in one lesson, do research on who you're pitching, whether or not it's an investor or a potential.
This is a great app, by the way. If you haven't used it already, it's called Refresh, and it links all your social networks and starts to creep on every little detail about the person you're about to meet. It crawls your calendar and it goes, oh, this next person you're about to meet is a big fan of the Knicks and likes to eat this and that and is married to so-and-so for this many years and is going to be coming up on their 4th year anniversary of their workplace. And it's really creepy, but you kind of, you at least know a few things about them going into the meeting, and that app's real.
And this actually feeds into likability.
Yeah.
People like people who like them, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know this already.
Yeah.
So this is one of the secrets that is not really apparent, right? Great, so let's jump forward to advertising as a business model. And you know, you've been running this for how many years now?
4 years.
4 years. So what was it like, you know, then, you know, so you raised 400K, and then you raised 4 million, and then you raised 11, and then you had partnerships everywhere. So tell us about that whole process a little bit.
Yeah, so I mentioned we went outside of gaming, so then now we're in 7 verticals. So games, fitness, food, music, productivity, sports, and finance. The most recent app that we went into that some of you might know is Mint, and that launched our finance vertical. So our strategy has always been every vertical we have a leader app. So in, for example, fitness, now it's Runkeeper. In gaming, it's Cut the Rope. In food, it's All Recipes. In you know, whatever you name it. So all these app verticals we have. In travel, it's Hitmonk. So you basically have these apps that will get you into the conversation, and then you have probably 30 or 40 underneath it that help fill up the whole vertical. So that's kind of been our strategy to this day. So we're now integrating to 3,300 apps, so the number there is a bit outdated. We use this SDK that essentially will work with the app to identify moments. So in a fitness app, it's logging a run. In a productivity app, we're integrating this app called AnyDo, another one called Out of Milk. Both of them are super popular. Another one even called, so it's so fun too because the developers come up with their own ideas. So we're integrating an app called My Homework, and it's literally an app for high school students to procrastinate. And so we actually have tons of candy brands that love rewarding the students when they're intentionally procrastinating. It's awesome. So we're not actually adding to, that's actually taking away anyways, whatever. The point is, there's sort of interesting executions that's come about.
Yeah.
We've even had a University of Florida researcher that integrated us into a diabetes. It's kind of weird to segue these candy examples of diabetes, but it's an app to help insulin takers, remind them to take insulin on time. And they actually put in their own rewards, like movie downloads and things like that. And so we actually knew that we were helping people get healthier. It was really cool. So a lot of the ideas came that way. So the way we've evolved is we've just continued to scale the apps that have integrated us, right? And then the brands that work with us. And naturally those snowball and cascade in terms of how many brands begin to come, because there are a lot of the brands are followers, right? They're fast followers. They go, oh, well, if P&G did it, then Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Reckitt Benckiser, all the big FMCGs come in, right? The most recent evolution, and this is kind of how we again evolve at year 4. If you think about it, you still have to continue to evolve. So as a company, we're now 80 people, San Francisco, New York, Chicago and LA are our sales offices. And we have like one guy in London, and that's our Europe office, and it's fantastic. And we like change his title around all the time. So when I do introduction, it'll be, hey, meet our GM of EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, or hey, meet our director of UK. You just make up titles. So another fun thing we do is no one has titles at Kiip. You basically can make up your own title as long as you can sell the deal. Right, so sometimes you're in a meeting and you're like, well, I'm the head of business development, even though you're like the business development associate. Who cares? If you get the deal, you can call yourself whatever the fuck you want, right? So,
and MaGIC, we just had this discussion in our team meeting today, because we kept changing our org chart, because we're also a startup at MaGIC, 10 months old. So someone suggested, hey, maybe we should take off titles for anyone under VP. And I'm like, if I were in the US, I would totally do this, but in Malaysia, titles are really important. So people actually
make it up.
Look at it and
it's not important until you become like a multi-thousand person company.
Yeah, that's true.
So we recently announced a partnership 2 weeks ago with MasterCard, and this was a
exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. So this this is a year of my life. So it was a labor of love, and when you know how it's like when you launch something that took you a year, it's less celebration, more like, oh, thank God, it actually came out and didn't get killed, you know? So the deal is very simple. MasterCard has a program called Priceless Surprises. And it's their next iteration of Priceless, where if you use your card, you could potentially be surprised and delighted by a reward. Sounds familiar, right?
Wow.
So I was like, well,
did they copy you?
No. So the good news is they came up with this idea completely independent. And I had met their CMO, Raja. Again, this is all serendipity. So actually the deal started off with this guy, his name is Adam Breutman. And 2 years ago I met him at South by Southwest at a Patron party. It was actually the Forbes 30 under 30 party was sponsored by Patron, and literally everything at the party was made of Patron. So I could not have been more sick of tequila after that. But anyways, I met Adam on the bus ride back because it was a remote mansion that the party was at, whatever. The point is, again, I didn't pitch him in the beginning. We just knew each other. We kept on talking. But when Priceless Surprises came out, Adam facilitated the conversation with Raja, who's the CMO of MasterCard. I ran into Raja at CES, which is another big event at the beginning of the year in Las Vegas. And I had about a minute basically to pitch him on the idea. And he had already at the time known of Kiip because his son is my age, and his son was playing a game and got a Kiip award the month before.
Wow.
So he actually knew of us, and I was so overjoyed. I was like, this is so cool. And then we talked to him. He's like, so how does this work with if we were to do it? I was like, well, simple. I don't want you to necessarily run rewards in games or other apps. Why don't you use our technology to power Priceless Surprises? Right? So they were doing it very manually. It was like, hey, let me tweet at you. So you could like tweet something and be like, I'm at the US Open, and then MasterCard Twitter account would tweet at you, hey, Cheryl, you're there? Do you want to get upgraded? And you're like, sure. And then they'll like figure out how to contact you on the side and like do it all manually. And I was like, this is so complicated. So we're like, how do we automate this? So the details are still a little bit sparse because we are officially launching April 6th. But essentially our technology is being licensed to power the entire program globally. And so it was a mammoth of a deal, and we're very excited about it. So the reason why this is very different from what we've done in the past is that in the past, a brand would run rewards in other apps they didn't own, right? So Capital One would run a reward in Mint. They don't own Mint. That's not the same company. But then we realized that there are companies that wanted to take the technology and run their own rewards. Right? So this is what MasterCard did, is they essentially were their first white label product. So I don't know if this is going to be another big business unit for us. We're going to use this as a validator. And at a certain point, though, you need to continue to try out things that you know could potentially have exponential vectors. So your duty as a CEO and as a strategist most of the time is, you have your core business model. We have cash flow. It's working. It's very close to profitability. There's things that you know that are working. And then there's things that you need to try in a certain level of responsibility using the resources that you have to see if there's potential exponential vectors that come from it.
It's very interesting. So, so because Kiip is a technology company, but you also have this huge sales component, how do you split the team between the two and like prioritize?
Yeah, so in the beginning, everything should be very product heavy, just because you want to make sure you invest the right time and energy just so you don't have as much technical debt as you would have later on in the scaling stage of the company. So we were very engineering heavy in the beginning, and then we began to hire salespeople kind of in the middle. And now we're very sales heavy.
So that changes the whole culture of the company.
100%.
Yeah, so tell me more about that. I visited your office recently.
Yeah.
So I used to co-work out of his office when I was moving from New York to San Francisco. And I was surprised to see, a lot of his team members were new. Tell us more about that.
So the people that are attracted to earlier stage startups have, again, like a builder, creator, entrepreneurial mindset. At year 3 and year 4, things change pretty drastically because you now want people that are less generalists and more specialists. And so the problem too is even the people that have stuck with you from year 1, when you start specializing, they view it as punishment. Because they go, well, I'm so good at all these things, and now you're taking away responsibilities from me and giving it to people who you think are apparently good at it, right? So you kind of encounter this kind of like, it's this reverse mentality where you go, well, I thought you were like so open and cool with everything, and then sometimes it just doesn't work that way. So you also then you want people who are loyal and stable. And the thing about entrepreneurs is, again, I'm not saying entrepreneurs aren't loyal and aren't stable. It's just that you get interested in something and you don't necessarily stay interested for a very long time. So we began to hire people who were, again, more specifically geared towards making sure they were very, very good at this one thing. So whether it be operations or back end or design or account management, all these different things we needed to make sure we had specialists in.
Yeah, because I remember the culture early on. I mean, I saw you moving from a small little office in Soma to like another different part of Soma to a much larger office, which was fun. I mean, how do you keep the culture? What are your company principles that really kept the company going?
Yeah, so I honestly shouldn't be the one giving advice here because we're still figuring it out too. I mean, we are in year 4, which is a very pivotal year. Because many of you know that most companies in Silicon Valley have a 4-year vesting period for its options. So there's.
Do you guys know what that means?
So basically, when you get stock options, the way to incentivize people to stay long is you have them basically realize its full value over a period of time, which will be 4 years. And most of the time you have the typical vesting schedule is, in the first year, once you pass year 1, then immediately a quarter of your stock vests. And then you have month-to-month vesting over 4 years. So once you hit the 4th year, right, people kind of go, well, I've already invested. So you have to re-up people, you have to give them raises, there's all sorts of things that start to happen. Mm-hmm. So, the thing that we've kind of been grappling with is the culture has changed. And in the beginning, you feel like you take it very personally. Right? Because I go, oh shit,
Because I don't know if you guys know, but in the beginning, he was in the news all the time. I don't know, hundreds of publications. And Kiip was like basically the star and the darling, and partially because he was young and he was growing so quickly. And it was this new thing, it's like changing advertising, right? And then now they're kind of at this growth stage where, all right, we already know what Kiip is, and they're continuing to grow, but it's at a different stage.
Exactly. So in the beginning as well, it's also you have a lot going for you because you're exciting, you're sexy, you're new, right? People want to learn more about that, right? And that's also one thing I want to encourage you to take advantage of. If you're early stage, it's a beautiful time, right? Because it's all blue skies. Anything can happen. It's like, oh, we could be $1 billion, we could do da-da-da. So that's a time where you should take advantage of that because it doesn't last forever. Because at some point, you're going to get old. The startup is not going to be that exciting. There's going to be all sorts of shit. So the other thing too is like, if you're not growing like 300%, year over year, it's almost like you're failing sometimes. So that's one of the challenges too, that there's a lot of companies like us in the Valley that have kind of been able to grow to a certain point, but we're not necessarily a 5 to 10 plus billion dollar company. But that's the other thing too that you learn to grapple with when you're there. You have to accept the fact that you aren't necessarily going to be a $40 billion company in like 2 years, right? And the problem is VCs in that region are trained to only look for those types of unicorns. So it's very discouraging as well when you're a startup that does, when you make tens of millions of dollars as revenue, that shouldn't be something you should be ashamed of, right? You should be happy about that. So I was actually pretty depressed last year because we're like, shit, we're not Uber, and it's like, but at the same time, it's like we're generating millions of dollars in revenue, and we should be proud of that. And so a lot of that is making sure employees realize that, and the type of people you hire also know that sometimes you scale startups at different speeds, right? If everyone's looking for an Uber, then you're not going to keep them for that long, and they're not the people you want to actually bring in the first place.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being so honest and truthful about that. I mean, this is the reality of startups. I'm so glad that you shared that piece of it, even the tough times, right? So I guess, what else should I ask you about your company? Like, what else would you like to say about Kiip and basically where you are now versus?
I mean, I think I've shared a good picture. I'm sure you guys are curious about extra stuff, so feel free to ask away.
Yeah. Well, I guess one big thing that I guess you always get asked about is your age, right? So I know he has specific interviews where they're like, oh, you've hired a lot of people older than you. So have I actually at MaGIC. But you're way, way younger than I am. So tell us how you work with older people, and also how do you gain your respect?
Yeah. I think it just comes down to picking the right ones, because there's some folks that will always have an issue with age, and they're not going to be the ones you'll ever get along with. So, it's always kind of what I share with other entrepreneurs. Like, sometimes they'll go, well, I still remember this. So I was at a pitch session a couple years ago to one of the biggest banks in the world, and the CEO was there, and I remember coming up. It was an evening event, started around like 6. Again, not that late, 6 p.m. It was like a cocktail event. And I remember coming up and he said, this is a little late for your bedtime, young man. I'm like, okay. And then at the end of the meeting, his tone had changed entirely. So I think age, much like many other characteristics, is sometimes perceived as a weakness, and in many cases is actually a strength. So what I would encourage you to think about is every weakness you think you have is actually a strength. Let me explain. So when you're young, you're deceptively benign. People think you can't, they are underestimating you all the time, and so they won't prepare as much against what you're trying to do. So this meant that a lot of competition got taken by surprise. This meant a lot of people who we were negotiating with got taken by surprise. So a lot of the times you can use these things to your advantage. The other thing is when you're young, you also have this never-ending permission to learn. And by the way, this never disappears. So one thing I would encourage all of you to realize, both young and old, in fact, everyone here is the same age as me. because you're all here, you're eager to learn, you're curious. Those are all mindset attributes. It's not about the actual age. So if you don't ever lose that endless curiosity and this desire to learn, you will always be young. So when you ask someone for help, they will, usually people, if they're nice people, they will help you because we're hardwired as human beings to pass along knowledge. That's how we've evolved as an actual human race. It's because we have to teach. So teaching is an innate characteristic. So if the person, by the way, you're asking for help from is not going to teach you, chances are they're not people who are going to succeed anyways, right? Because I found that the most amazing CEOs and leaders in the world are the nicest people ever, right? They always want to share. They're willing to spend time and pass along knowledge.
Because when they share it, they gain something.
They do gain something as well.
You're verbalizing what you've learned.
Exactly.
You're teaching someone.
Exactly. So that ties into the age thing because the other, again, popular perception of young people is we go, well, who needs experience, right? And the other thing that I try to explain to people is I actually value experience because there's only so many things you can vicariously learn and read. You need to have someone who's, again, lived it and can immediately save you a bunch of time from going down the wrong path.
Actually, that's a good question because someone said MaGIC, I wondered too, do I hire mostly young people my age so that we keep the culture and we keep it flexible, or do we purposely hire more senior people to
You hire everyone with the same mindset. That's the other thing. So young and curious and willing to learn, and also able to teach. So all three of those things are important characteristics. Now, when I say same mindset, I know everyone goes, well, don't you need a diverse team and things like yes, you do. But in terms of backgrounds, in terms of this eagerness and that curiosity, that perpetuates a culture of youth. And that's a great way to, again, create a company that has a lot of energy that people want to work with, things like that.
I love that. Yeah, that's really important lessons for all of us here.
In fact, I don't even care about how old you are, honestly. Like, it doesn't even matter, because I'm going to learn so much from you, right? And hopefully you feel like you can learn something from me or from the company, right? That's the whole point. It's like it's an exchange.
Yeah, I do weekly team meetings, and once a month I remind my team that I don't look at your gender, your age, your race, religion. I don't really care. It is about what you can do in the company, your performance in the company.
Exactly.
So tell me more about location. So you moved from Canada to Silicon Valley. Tell us more about how that location contributed to your success, and you think that if that's necessary.
So we live in a very different time now. So from when I started the company in 2010 till now, a lot of things has changed, right? So I wanted to talk about location specifically because I think a lot of you are here are wondering, well, I live in Malaysia, obviously you were in Silicon Valley, so all this shit happened. So here's the thing, right? I specifically did not go down there to start a company, right? I wasn't like, I'm gonna move down to Silicon Valley and start a company and raise VC money. That was not my original intention. So what happened was, when I talk about serendipity, it's finding the right environment where your skills are augmented. So this is actually kind of like a cheat, right? So it's like, you don't judge some scientists once said, I don't know who, fucking Edison or Einstein once said, you don't judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree, right? So if you have, so I felt like when I was being very nerdy in Vancouver, that I was a fish that was being judged in how well it climbed a tree, because I would have to repeat myself like 3 times, right? I'd be like, I got this idea, la 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 la. They go, what? I do mining, right?
They didn't get it.
Yeah, because they're all about mining. And then, so the thing about the environment is you want to go to an environment. That's why people go to LA when they want to act. They go to New York when they want to be in banking. They want to go to Paris when they want to be in food or culinary, and then in Milan for fashion, because there's going to be various environments where those things...
Like-minded people.
Exactly. But what I'm about to say will hopefully help quash all of your concerns, which is now that the world's changing so much. These people you can gather with practically anywhere, right? And social media and the ability to reach out to people pretty much makes the barriers, and the fact that you can, by the way, step on a plane and be anywhere within 24 hours in the world means that location should not be an issue. Now, and then money as well. Again, I was just searching flying economy class from here to San Francisco. Last time I checked was like a $900 round trip, right? And I know you're like, well, okay, that's during low season. Yes, I get it. The point is, it's not that hard.
Our conversion rate.
I know. But the whole point is that there's, again, certain times and ways to get places where, again, you can start to create those connections. But again, it's finding environments that are conducive to your strength, and this is a version of that, right? And stop trying to compare yourself too, right? The other problem is, because I came from Vancouver, there was a while where Vancouver was like, well, how do we become Silicon Valley North, right? And Vancouver has a history of this actually becoming, their nickname, Hollywood North as well. You're familiar with Vancouver, and that the government made a bunch of tax breaks, and you guys have heard of Lionsgate Films, right? Lionsgate is actually the name of a very famous geographical landmark in Vancouver, and that company was actually started in Vancouver because Hollywood North came from Lionsgate becoming so big. Yeah, so anyways, point is every region will have its success stories, right? And you guys have what Grab Taxi, what do we call it? Grab Taxi and a few others. And then in Vancouver we now have Hootsuite. And so every region will have this thing. So stop trying to measure this dick measuring contest. There's no need to do that because it's like you all have your strengths. Exactly. Here, the strengths are resource heavy, right? You've got an amazing environment of a lot of old money that you can use to invest into amazing new startups, and a lot of resource people that are in this building going, well, fuck, we need to diversify our investments. So that's kind of the thing that happened in Canada too. There's a lot of resource investors that invest in mining and things like that, and they go, well, we need to diversify now, so they're investing in tech.
Right. I mean, our strengths here, like Muslim tech is huge market. No one has really capitalized on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's one area of opportunity.
Exactly.
We have a lot of fintech companies in the back end, not really sexy, but I think we can leverage that.
Yeah. Again, the other thing, people always go, okay, because it's limiting, because they go, well, it's limiting in Southeast Asia because there's so many languages, they're logistically complicated, and there's so many cultures. Like, that's actually a strength. Yeah. Because if you screw up with one culture, like, I got all these other ones I can try. You got like 12 chances, right? And then you also have Indonesia, which I just remind you is the third biggest population in Asia. And that country is blowing up in many ways. For example, for us, we've seen the biggest traffic growth out of Indonesia, and from smartphone adoption. And primarily, the one unique character trait that you guys should pay attention to is that the first devices that families are now owning that are computing devices are actually always connected. Because now the first device they're buying isn't a PC tower that you're plugging in an ADSL connection, it's a 3G or 4G tablet or a smartphone. So that means that all these families that are developing very quickly don't really know of a world that's offline. They're always online. So that's completely radical in terms of, if you look at the US and the tech adoption curve, it was like, yes, you had to have your PC, and then you bought your other thing, and then and then you had your laptop, and then now it's literally like boom, now you're like there, right? So that's what's so fascinating about that region, and look for opportunities that leverage that.
Yeah, going back to this regional play, like for example, SoftSpace, it's like the Square of Southeast Asia, right? And they have the market in Southeast Asia. They're a 2-year-old company, and they're processing about $1 million in transaction every year.
Wow.
Square tried to enter Asia, to Japan, failed miserably. So this is one of the strengths. It was really hard times for them to expand. They first got a partnership with Thailand, because the Bank of Malaysia wouldn't work with them. And then once they got the Thailand partnership, then they came back and they got regional.
Here's the other advantage. There's a lot of Asian culture that I'm sure in Malaysia or other Southeast Asian countries there's a similar concept to the Chinese concept of guanxi, right? Where relationships and things being born here. One thing is I go to China, and if I were to try to do, and we're trying to do a few deals there, but it's really to partner and JV with other companies. But they look at me, they take one sniff, and they go, "You're not from here, right?" And it's just an entirely different.
Actually, you tried to enter Japan.
We did, and it worked out.
What happened? Why?
Because so Japanese culture is like they never really tell you no. They just go. So that's what happened.
They're trying to be polite.
Yeah, so you just never know if it's a no. Fuck, am I going to do this or not?
Did you invest a lot into that?
No, I mean, the good news is we had an investor, Digital Garage, that helped us. They knew the framework to test it without it being too costly, and we just found that we were a bit too early. Now, we had some great success stories, which I think we can leverage if we ever decide to go back there. But as a region, it was just very unique from an advertising standpoint. Because, again, when you think about the biggest sort of economies, just cities in the country, a lot of it relies still on out-of-home advertising, like billboards and bus ads, and then TV. And that's pretty much how they spend most of their advertising dollars. And then mobile advertising for them actually, it's very similar to how mobile video has blown up in the US, which is people are basically buying mobile video ads on phones, which is just an extension of television. So it's less about unique ad units, it's more about, let me just take what I'm already spending on television and then pretending like the phone is a TV. So it was a very unique dynamic that way.
So maybe in a couple of years, when they evolve.
Who knows? I think, and we've had other companies to copy us there. And it's funny, they also didn't work out either. So
Yeah.
MaGIC, which is a big social network in Japan, which you guys might have heard of, tried to start, they're not actually from Japan, are they? I think anyways, whatever, but it got popular in Japan for a little while. They tried to start a very similar version to what we were doing, and it didn't work out either. So sometimes I actually kind of like seeing copycats do their thing, because you can see them fail before you do. Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, you learn all the lessons from them. Yeah.
It's great.
That's fantastic.
So my next question is about press. Like I mentioned, he's been all around, interviewed by every single publication you can think of. And I always tell this to people, right? At a startup, when you're a nobody, you need to tell your story, and you need your own brand to attract good people to work with you. So give us some tips for how you got so much press, and what is it about, aside from your age and being young and all that, like what?
Well, no, so that's actually relevant in that you kind of use what makes you unique.
Okay.
Always in the beginning to get that attention.
Like I'm a woman.
Yeah, so exactly. So use the thing that you know will give you that attention. So it's the peacock strategy, right? So what about you? So this is the other thing too that, again, Americans are notorious for this, right? Americans are very good at going, well, we're really good at this, and they're just like, and many of you call it boasting. But I will say this: there's moments in life where you're not supposed to be humble. And that's when you're sitting in front of a fucking reporter, right? You don't go, oh, like I just have this thing. Well, why the fuck am I interviewing you, right? So, when you're talking to a reporter, it literally is like, what is the one thing that again differentiates you, makes you super unique, that gives you that upper hand? So you use that to attract that attention. And here's the other thing about press is that it's also a snowball effect. So when you get your first legitimate article, you can use that to get everything else. My history with press is again a little bit unique because at Dig worked with a lot of news publishers. Here's another funny story. There's this, we used to host these big parties called Dig Swing, get it? And it was a lot of reporters, a lot of publications, and I was, again, not of age, and was paying sometimes a very large bar tab for everyone to drink, and I was using my brother's ID. So it was fantastic. But I got to know a lot of reporters during that time. So that meant that I had a lot of close relationships with these reporters even before I started the company. And so what I would do is, text these guys and sort of tell them what new things that we were doing, and they would kind of be curious to learn. Now, for those of you who go, well, I haven't built a close relationship with a reporter. You only really need to have one when you start off that is at least curious to write about you, and you've built enough sort of allure around when you're creating. So the other thing I've sort of shared in terms of pitching a reporter is, most of you have a tendency to, and I'm generalizing again, when you pitch a reporter, you write everything in the first email, right? You go, I'm this, I do all this, well, here's all the screenshots, you send it off, and then the response is like, no, right? Or pass, right? And then your hopes and dreams are dashed, and you go, fuck, I hate this reporter, Here's the number one strategy is don't dump everything into the first email, because that gives them, when they reject you, they just rejected your entire concept. So what you need to do is you put like a 1 line or 2 lines. Teaser. But here's where it's like it works to your favor in many ways. The first way it works to your favor is they go, who the fuck is this person that they think they're so cool that they only put in 1 sentence to pitch me, right? And then they'll always respond, well, tell me more. You're like, well, da-da-da. Or they might go, this is already done. You're like, well, only this part I share with you seems like it's done. Here's some other stuff. And you kind of slowly reveal more. And the number one strategy is to get on the phone. And the reason why is because as much as we're all about social media and technology and your email and IM, the most classic way to get someone invested in you is to have them speak live with you. So what would happen is I would always go, well, when can we, my favorite line is, when can we hop on the phone so I can share more color? It's like the best line ever. It's like, what do you mean share more fucking color? So I was like, okay, so let's hop on the phone. So they'll be like, all right, let's talk for a few minutes. Like literally 5 minutes is all I ask, right? So we'll talk on the phone, and then 5 minutes will inevitably turn into 15 minutes. Because here's the best thing about live conversations is no human being, unless you're a complete asshole, will go, duh, I can't talk to you about you, hang up, right? So, so they'll keep talking to you. Maybe they'll kind of mix hints that they're busy. They'll go, oh, I gotta run into this. Okay, I got a couple more things. But if they're genuinely interested, they will stay talking with you for about 15, 20, 30, even hours sometimes. And so what I ended up doing is, the first few articles, they'll end up talking to me about half an hour. But here's the thing about a reporter you have to realize. You have to understand they have their incentives and their quotas for the day too. So they only have so many hours in the day where they can write. So if they've already spent half an hour on the phone with you, they're like, fuck, that's like the content I have to write my article for the day. So they're gonna write about you most likely, because if you're at least interesting, they already spent time with you, they've already invested in you, right? So they're gonna write that, but yeah, it's not trapping, it's just like, this is how the game is, right? So it's like, so then they'll write the first article, and then what happens is you take that article and then you tell every other reporter, hey, I just got covered by XYZ, and they go, well, that's cool, but it's already been written about it. You're like, well, that's fine, but next time something comes out, you know, I'd love to tell you more about it. And so what happens is then they go, oh wow, this person is so nice, they're offering to give me a scoop on their next thing. So now you're building the rapport with something that they never even asked you for in the first place. So like, it's kind of like creating this like, you know, like this equation where you're kind of like going like this, and then you give them a scoop, and then they go, oh, that's awesome, thank you for giving me that, and you kind of like build up like that. So over time, eventually becomes like a back and forth. And then another thing too, and I don't want to sound like it's so scheming, it isn't, it's like they want cool content that gets traffic. At the end of the day, that's what they're looking for. So if you give them exciting, cool, interesting things. So one of the other rules that I have is every time I email a reporter, and even this goes for sales, every time you email one of your potential prospects, make sure there's new content in every single new email you send. If you just always send an email and go, hey, just following up on this, you know, it's like, well, fuck that, because it's like no one's gonna read that. If you always put something unique or new in every new message you send, you train people into looking at your emails.
Yeah, but the title also matters, right?
Title matters. So use a lot of exclamation marks. So don't use too many. So don't use like 7, right? Use like 2. Usually 2 is good. 2 is good. Because it means that you sound exciting. Because like people read this stuff. Because it just has the same effect when you use caps when you're texting someone. You're loud. You're yelling.
You're not supposed to use caps.
You're not. I'm saying don't use caps. Use exclamation marks, right? Because the whole point is when a reporter reads it, they literally imagine you going, "Oh, this is so cool! Oh, this is awesome! I want to read about it." Because generally speaking, you want to listen to something that's exciting. Right? You don't ever want to listen to something like, "Oh, there's this cool thing," and then fade off. You know. So don't use ellipses either. That's the other thing. People like sometimes people just use it naturally in text. Like I want to fall asleep when I see an ellipses. So you want to use something that's like, you know, again, exciting to read.
Cool. All right, so we have some more time. We have like actually 25 minutes.
So I know I've been talking a lot. So you guys want to kind of stand up and just do jumping jacks? Yeah, come on, guys, just stand up. Because it's like, how the hell have you been sitting down for this long? All right, ready? Just not jumping jacks. Just stretch up. Yeah. Okay, stretch down. Yeah. Okay, you know, spin around. Okay, yeah. Okay, and high five your neighbor. All right, high five.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
So, are we going to open it up to questions?
Yes.
Okay.
So very fortunate. We weren't going to have a Q&A session, but we have time. So shoot, one there behind in the middle.
Okay.
Please tell us your name and then your question.
Hi, my name is Chanson. So you mentioned you got your first fund is a 300K by just showing the fake prototype.
Yeah.
A working
But
prototype.
it didn't work that way, so let me give a big asterisk. It was because I got 2 warm intros from founders that they had funded already, right? And I had worked at a Silicon Valley company that had people working there validating. So what happened was when I first pitched them, literally, I think 2 hours after I walked out of that room, I got a couple text messages from Scott, from Heaton, and from Matt Van Horn going, are you raising money from True Ventures? I'm like, yes, why? They're like, well, they just called me and they asked me about you. Like, are you legitimate? Do you actually do shit? So the way that the Valley works, and again, like in every business environment, it's all about validation for the back channel. If you have done something that has shown people in a close proximity, people have worked with you, that you have the capability of building and doing X, Y, Z, they will vouch for you. And that's kind of how that vouching ends up leading to that type of thing. Again, if I came in cold, they had no idea who I was, very likely that it wouldn't have happened. Yeah, but keep on
Do you
your
have a
question.
specific question?
And so after you
It might have been like, well, how's that possible? That might have been the question.
after you show the prototype, okay,
Yeah.
so how many months for you to build the final product?
It was from October to January, and then in February we kind of launched the early version of the SDK. Yeah.
By only 3 partners to build the final product.
We hired a mobile engineer, and so there were 4 of us in the beginning.
Okay, one more question last.
Sure.
So do you have any fear or confidence before the final product come out? Or do you do any market survey before the final product come out?
Yeah. So you guys have heard that saying from Reid Hoffman where you don't launch a product where you're ashamed of it because it's so like unkept that like you pushed it too early. This is actually if you're I just butchered the quote, but the whole point is you should release a product early because if you wait on it, you sit on it too long, it's sometimes too late. So you want to get something out there as fast as possible. So you get that research from the people who are actually using the darn thing, because there's only so much testing you can do in a closed environment where it actually validates it.
Next, there.
Hello, hi. I would like to ask you 2 questions. I would say this once. I have a very good respect on you because I've been following your career path and also achievements. And I saw you a lot in Forbes magazine and Entrepreneur.
Thank you.
So my question to you are, how do you integrate business models which is revolutionize the advertising industry through works? And how did the VC value the company? And how did Kiip grow? How did the company grow?
Okay.
I think that's.
I have to know.
Okay. Okay. Let's see.
Can we
Let's see if
limit it to
let's try to
questions?
combine it. Let's see if we can try to combine it. Keep on going.
All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. As far as I
My answer is yes. All right. Next. Okay.
no, so you see, as far as I'm concerned, my last check says that your company is valued around 50 million. If I'm mistaken, is it correct?
I'm confirming or denying anything.
All right. What is the challenge? Okay, what is the challenge of being a 50 million company?
Well, that's dependent on that first thing that I'm not confirming.
Alright.
So I'll answer your first 3 questions in one. So
Alright.
you talked about like how do you change a traditional industry like advertising. What was the other thing? It was.
So that's the problem when you ask me
You
questions.
can answer me for question and I will get my question as well.
Well, what was out of all your questions? What is the most important one you want me to answer?
I think this is the most mistakes.
Out of all of them, what if I could answer one for you? What would
All right, I think your business models, because I'm trying to comprehend the business models.
So the advertiser pays to be a part of a moment, and then we rev share it with the developer. So let's say Gatorade wants to be in a fitness moment. They pay not by moment, but actually by engagement, which is when someone actually claims the offer. And the moment that happens, we trigger a revenue event, and then we revenue share that 50-50 with us and the developer. So the developer makes money, and we make money, and the advertiser gets the benefit of someone claiming the offer from them. That's our business model.
Win-win-win.
Right, so how can you get the companies value that, couples of millions?
Yeah, well, so the valuation, so here's the other thing, just generally speaking of valuation, doesn't mean dick all, right? Because it literally only means something until you get an exit. So right now, it's more like a dick measuring contest, and people who want to potentially work for you, you will give them options that have a percentage. Sometimes you'll talk about, sometimes you won't. That's related to the valuation, and they'll kind of calculate in their head how much that's currently worth, and then over time you go, well, again, it could be anything. It could be 100 million, it could be 300 million, it could be $1 billion, who knows, right? So from a valuation standpoint, again, a lot of it's just like, it doesn't really mean a lot until the actual, that's why, again, when you think about options and you think about startup growth, people fixate so much on the valuation. But like you said, would you rather own 1% of $100 billion or 100% of zero, right? So it's like it doesn't matter, right? So those are the things that people don't realize when they get caught up in that initial phase. Because as well, if you think about it, a lot of it's all about absolute gains versus the relative gains. So it's like when you look at the absolute gain of $20, $30 million, whatever happens when you get diluted and your valuation goes up, it's about the absolute gain. So people just they fixate so much on, well, my percentage went down, this sucks, So it's like, don't think about it that way.
Yeah, just focus on building a good product.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, it's like once you focus too much on the money, then it becomes a problem.
I just want to be courteous to the rest of the audience. Thank you so much.
Tweet at me. Tweet at me. Brian_Wong. Tweet at me. I'll answer you when I'm
ready
to
over
answer.
here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the questions.
Hi there, my name is Alan from Movie Go. Quick one. So, if there's one thing that you would do differently before you took the leap of getting on your journey, what would that be? One thing.
One thing I do differently? Well, that's a very good question. I think what we would have done is started doing that platform play a little bit earlier. because what happens when you are labeled as an advertising company is you pretty much get bucketed with the worst performing stocks on the stock market. So, for example, when we're being compared to public companies, they go, oh, you're like Millennial Media, which, by the way, is trading less than 1x their revenue right now, which is the worst multiple ever. So and we're not anything close to Millennial Media, but just because the way they describe themselves as mobile and advertising, people will make that comparison. So had we had something that was able to instantly create a differentiator, I think we would have been positioned a bit differently, and our valuations might be a bit different as well. And by the way, as much as I mentioned, it doesn't matter while you're building it, sometimes as you scale, valuations matter for example, buying other companies, right? Because if you buy another company, you're doing it pure stock, at least you now have enough cannon fodder where you go, if I'm worth 200 million, I give you $10 million of stock. It's $10 million of stock, right? At least that's how they perceive it. So that's how sometimes that matters.
Can you explain a bit more?
Sure.
Benefit
Sure.
other people.
Sure.
So I thought you were a platform play from the beginning.
Yes.
You did say that, hey.
But we monetize through advertising.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So the problem is I gotta take a picture of this because you guys are gonna see it. Yeah, what's up, guys? Say hi. Yeah. Say hi. Okay. All right. Because I'm gonna forget. Yeah. So platform is also like a relative term from a business model standpoint. So we're a platform, yes, by the mechanics of the way our code is distributed, because other apps use it to do certain things with it. But from a business model standpoint, it's advertising, like he had asked.
Right.
Platform business model is when you license it as a SaaS model, right? So that's where I feel like we could have done something a bit earlier in that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Thanks for asking.
I think
You sound a lot like my board, too.
I think I saw the hand.
So yourself, is it nurture or nature where you are today? And mid-term, long-term goals for Kiip and whether you'll stay and exit?
Just to give my parents credit, I think it was nature. The genetics, I'm kidding. I mean, here's the thing. So my family comes from actually, believe it or not, an entrepreneurial history. So my grandparents on both my mom and dad's side were they owned farms and they sold goods. So they were both entrepreneurs. My grandfather on my mom's side was also pretty accomplished jeweler back in the World War days, where he would service American soldiers coming over to Hong Kong. So he was a very savvy entrepreneur as well. So I think in many ways, like my parents also tell me, you remind me of your grandfather sometimes, things like that. So I think there might have been some nature there. I think from a nurture standpoint, though, it was being brought up in an environment, again, where I had these extracurricular activities that I did to help me kind of get out of my shell. And here's another thing that is very interesting. It's not completely coincidental that my brother is 4 years older than me and I skipped 4 grades. Right? So if you think about it, my brother ended up teaching me a lot without even knowing that he was teaching me, because I would just follow him everywhere. And really for cost reasons, my mom would just bring me to wherever he was going, right? So I would just learn a lot of things that he learned. And then I also took social cues from him, because he, again, grew up in a very normal environment, had friends in high school and things like that, so I would pick cues from him on how to act in front of people and things like that. So that's also why I'm like not as socially awkward, I think, you know? I'd be pretty fucking awkward sometimes. But yeah, it's like that's kind of how I ended up picking up those cues.
Cool. Next question over here.
Good evening, Mr. Brian. My name is Why and How. What's the
Your name is Why and How? This is fucking awesome. My company's called Why and How. You're missing the who and what.
What is the most common
I don't think he got the joke.
Cantonese word that you use very often?
Most common what?
Cantonese word. I'm Cantonese.
Siuman.
Mati. No one got the joke? Okay. Hagao, Sumai. Hi.
Alright, question white shirt guy. Yeah, you.
Hi, my name is Kai. We're partner running hostelhunting.com. So
Hostile hunting?
yeah.
Oh, Jesus. Another Hostile hunting. Hostiles today. Sorry.
No, when you pitch to your investors, like VCs or angel investors, when you approach them, okay, assume, let's say they like you, like the first factor you mentioned, and what are the other factors that you will consider to let them to invest in you? For example, like guidance or connections or...
How you choose investors?
Yes, the rapport, yeah.
I'll just put it very simply. Remember, you're going to spend the next 5 to 10 years of your life with this person. So do you see yourself being with them for 5 to 10? It's like a relationship. It's like getting married. So I pick my investors purely on that fact initially. Like, can I stand them for 5 years? And in many cases, I'm coming up to my 4th year with a lot of my investors, right? And I'm so grateful that they're here, and I still am able to stand them. We spent a lot of time together. So
how often do you meet?
Some of them I talk weekly on the phone. We usually meet about once every 2 to 3 months. Yeah.
And how long would you take for this process to be fully set, like for a decision to be made?
How long I would take?
Yeah, like
Sometimes I
because
would
you spend
decide.
time with like every one of them.
Well, you kind of give yourself an artificial deadline, right? Because everything needs to have an end date, right? So if you keep it lingering, then it kind of, you don't really. So you kind of always create a sort of a artificial, close date. You go, well, we're announcing this big partnership on this day, so I want to close it before that. Or we're going to make this big hire, and we want to launch this product. So you have the power to create your own deadlines, and that's a great way to artificially shorten the process.
Thanks.
You create that sense of urgency artificially.
Exactly.
It works.
Yeah, and by the way, just make it up. Right? They go, why? Well, because I felt like it.
I think it's something
I'm the CEO, right?
Yeah, I think that's something I had behind first.
What do you think mobile advertising in Southeast Asia region, and is Kiip trying to expanding towards this region or Malaysia specifically?
Yeah, so I think some mobile advertising juggernauts here are like InMobi and Amobi. Now, just from the creativity of naming, I would also make the comparison to how creative they are with their products. So their products are just banners and videos and install ads, and it's like the same thing, right? So there's really there's no need for them to reinvent the wheel because they are making a lot of money doing the simple sort of linear evolution of it. So I do believe that we have a big opportunity to try something different here. And specifically for Malaysia, we do have quite a bit of traffic here as well. So a lot of it's working with agencies in the region. I'm meeting with a couple of the agencies actually down in Singapore tomorrow because they're all in town. Well, I'm actually here, and I didn't even mention why. So tomorrow, there's a big event in Singapore called the Festival of Media, and it's all about media buying and advertising, and I'm speaking there tomorrow afternoon. So a lot of the meetings are going to be related to that as well.
There was, yeah.
My name is Zach. So you have a two-sided business model, right? Developers, brands, no brands, developers, developers, no brands. How do you
Chicken and egg, yeah?
Right? How do you build that critical mass before people get bought and drive?
Yeah, it's a great
Great
question.
question.
Chicken and egg business models are really, really hard, and I don't recommend you do them unless you have like a lot of patience and just get beat up all the fucking time, right? Because you basically have in our case, we have 3 constituents we have to please. You have developers that want to make money, you have brands that want to get acquisition, and you have users that want to make sure they have the best experience in their apps. So there's a lot of constituents to take care of. Now, from a chicken and egg standpoint, you usually want to you want to like reimburse or kind of, pump up one side first when you start. In our case, we bought gift cards in the beginning, right? And we used those as rewards to reward players who were playing games. So we serviced the developers in the beginning.
Oh, so you artificially bought.
Yeah, so we bought a bunch of gift cards, yeah, and that's how we.
We don't have gift cards in Asia.
Yeah, it's weird, yeah. So that's how we started, right? So many of you kind of have to do that. You have to pick one side or the other, right? So you'll hear about this in growth hacking stories of like Airbnb, other marketplace type businesses. How do you get one side in first before the other comes in? So it's usually pretty simple. Just figure out one side that you can pump up, right? And get in through either money or some type of additional resource. And then the other will most likely, again, follow if you're savvy enough with timing. It's all about timing as well.
Great question.
Sharon.
Oh, sorry. Over here. Yeah.
As a builder of a platform, did you ever have a fear of suspicion? And once you created the platform, you would be like some sort of stealing the businesses of others away
As in,
And
I'm
how
stealing their
you-
business or they're stealing my business?
Okay, those who decide to join you,
Yeah.
let's say
Take a minute, it's okay.
I'm also actually
Yeah.
trying to create a platform.
Yeah.
Let's say they decide to join you. Yeah, ever had a fear that you were trying to like, how to say?
Affect their ability to do
Yes.
advertising as well, things like that? Would you saying like that?
Yeah, it's like you're stealing
Like the
another
guilt.
party's the guilt. Yeah. Is there a guilt when you started doing something like this?
It's a business. His job is to disrupt models. His job is to make other companies.
Dude, if you're guilty about making money, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. I mean, like, it's like there are.
Of course, in reality, it's not.
I think I know what you're asking. There's a fine line for business ethics and creating something that has true value. So part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur is really looking deep inside yourself and realizing, like, am I doing this as true value for them? So for me, I took the universal truism that not a single human being that is normal on the planet has ever tapped on a banner ad on their mobile device on purpose, which is a universal truth. And because of that, I'm doing a service if I'm helping eradicate that as the accepted norm of a user experience. So that's how I ended up starting it, right? So yes, there might have been situations along the way where we might have hampered the ability for them to direct sell advertising, but then I go, well, because I aggregated 40 fitness apps, that's how we end up getting the business from Gatorade and big brands, because if you were to individually negotiate with Gatorade to try to get them to sponsor your one app, it might have been a little bit more difficult. So as an aggregate model and as a group and a pooled traffic, it ended up creating value for everyone. So the tie that lifts all the ships, that's kind of the model you should be going after.
It's very basic, but
Who is next? Okay, we'll go there. Because I saw it.
I was just wondering, how do you keep from being sane? Like, you're always busy, and then one day shit might hit your fan, and then like, how do you want to yourself, you propose?
Yeah. So it's I think you're just constantly insane, and you kind of figure out like a numbness where you appear normal to everyone else, right? Yeah, you're just like, you're still pretty fucked up in the head, because you're like, there's things that are going on, you're like, oh my god. And then so there's stuff that I kind of go, well, no 23-year-old should ever need to experience this, right? But it still happens. But practical advice would be, like, find something that distracts you. So my distraction is skiing. So I love skiing. And in fact, the reason why I love it so much is because you're trying not to die. So that's the best way to be distracted from thinking about work. So figure out what you're, so that's why some entrepreneurs have these crazy sports they do, whether it's kite surfing or, you know, some of them think of the sport as going out to clubs and bars and picking up women too. So again, different things that they think about, which is unfortunate. But for me, it's skiing. And so find something that's distracting for you and use that as your muse, something that helps inspire you as well. So for me, I also love traveling because it gives me this ability to be distracted by learning about new cultures and new ways of doing things. And I'm so curious that I can't wait to learn all these things. So that's one way to stay sane. But do recognize that you are never going to be normal again, right? When you do this type of thing, you are signing up for a lot of shit, right? And you're going to have moments where, again, you just go, well, how is this even possible? And it just happened. So the other thing I also will say is, as an entrepreneur, you're planning for the worst to happen pretty much all the time, right? So you, either from an investment standpoint or customers, all these things, you expect, you want to know what the scenario would be like in a dead disaster, right? So if you've thought that far, at least if it happens, you kind of know that you could do one thing or another to spring into action. So the worst thing that happens if you are, again, dealing with a tough situation is inaction. There's one thing I always share with my team. If something really bad happens, the worst thing you can do is sit around and do nothing. At least do something. And your job as a leader is to, even if you have no fucking idea what to do next, just go, we're going to do this. And then say it with determination. Because everyone around you will go, okay, we're going to do this now. And then it takes their mind off of the problem, and at least they feel like they're doing something. And usually that's how solutions come about, because you're getting them used to actually acting on things. And that's what usually happens.
Absolutely. And if you make a wrong decision, then you just pivot.
Exactly.
That is
No one needs to know that you made the wrong decision
Yeah.
either. And then you go, well, at least team, we knew that we didn't need to do that, right? So the big thing about failure is that you learn what not to do, which I think is one of the more valuable lessons you can learn as well.
So because of Brian's time, and I want to be mindful that he has to rush to the airport, please don't storm him after this. I'm just going to let him. I mean,
Well, we have some time. I mean, we're okay, right? We're okay. We're okay. We have some time.
Okay, if you want to meet guys,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine. But I'm going to let 2 more questions so that for the benefit of everyone. I'm going to, somebody raise their hands here, so I'm going to take 1 question here and 1 question in the middle. I think you guys got it. Or you put your hand down, so I'm going to ask him and you here. Up here. Or, oh, sorry, you. White shirt guy and blue shirt guy. All right.
All right, hi Brian, I'm Famin. I would like to ask regarding your target markets of your apps. Do you have a specific target market for your apps, like fitness app targeting which market, food app like targeting which market, range of age like 19 to 25?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we didn't necessarily pick the apps by the target market. So that was one of the traditional concepts in advertising that we found also kind of silly, which was traditionally when you looked at a magazine, for example, as a media property, it would be like, so in the US there's a magazine called Men's Health, so obviously the perception of Men's Health is that, you know, males that are looking to be healthy or exercising or active are going to read this magazine. So then a healthy brand like a Yoplait or a Danone would go in there and buy an ad in that magazine, or an Under Armour or Nike, right? The problem now, the way that we've evolved is that these apps don't have a one demographic that it serves. It could be anyone that goes in there. And because of technology, you can pinpoint the woman who's in the app, the man who's in the app, the parent, the working professional, whoever it might be. So we became savvier in how we targeted people so that we could say, any app, one come all, we can just find the mom in that workout app. So let's find moms that are working out, right? So those are the things that we could then be able to streamline. So that's the concept of advertising that's evolved, right? Historically, it'd be like, this is the one property I'd buy against and that's it. But now you have demographics and personalities as well, mindsets. So the new thing and hot thing in advertising is actually targeting mindsets, right? It's targeting need states. Because I'll give a very classic example, which is a very easy example. It is like, if you're hungry, I don't fucking care if you're male or female, you're hungry. So you're gonna wanna eat shit. So it doesn't matter, right? So it's like, that's gonna be a need state, you can target hunger, right? So that's the type of thing that we look at now from an advertising standpoint.
Very interesting. Last question.
Actually, I keep thinking about this business model, right? And I keep thinking, why Apple Store didn't do it? They have the best position to do it. They can access millions of apps. One day they announced, I can make all of your apps become free, but you need to join the program and I will connect you with all the big companies. Then they will capture everything. But
well, they tried to do it with iAd, right? But here's the thing about iAd, it was still fucking banner ads, right? So the problem is, there's this, again, continued linear evolution that is utterly frustrating, because the thing about linear evolution in products is you can't get yourself out of it. And one thing, and this is the last tip I'll leave you guys with, is we intentionally didn't call ourselves an ad network, right? And we used words like serendipity and rewards and moments and engagement. These are all words that are totally different than what would be traditionally used for like ads and impressions and clicks and, you know, view through and things like that. So because we use different words, people began to talk about us and then go, wait, they're using different words, so it must be a bit different. So the words actually ended up helping them think about you a bit differently. So one thing I highly encourage you to do, whatever you guys create, try to avoid at all costs using words that everyone else is using to describe their business model, right? So if someone goes, well, you're like, and that's one thing I think I remember sharing with you, because she was like aggregating daily deals with City Pockets, which was her old company in case you guys, sorry, purchase deals. But it's like calling it like a wallet for deals would have put her in like a very, again, niche, you know, unfundable, really kind of dynamic at the point when the deal market began to implode. So calling it something else, like we're a, you know, the stored value platform for the world, right? We help, you know, aggregate stored value. What's stored value? Well, anything where fucking money or anything value is stored, right? So that could be a gift card, it could be credit card, it could be, you know, it could be airline miles, it could be anything. Then it became broad enough that it was different and described differently, that it could survive you know, market dynamics that ebbs and flows, like, for example, the deal market imploding. So language really, really matters, and I can't stress it enough.
differentiation.
Yeah, this is such an amazing session, guys. Thank you, guys. I already know a lot of stuff he said, but today was just like having it all together. I mean, I haven't sat down with you and talked about your entire life story like that. So even for me, I'm like, wow, I'm so proud to know you as a person, as a friend, as an advisor, and you know, just amazing. So again, thank you. Guys, you can chat with him, but please be mindful that he has to catch a flight at 11.
Should be okay. Yeah, 11. That's
Okay,
fine.
yeah. Okay, thank you for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Using live stream? MaGIC, right? Oh, you are from MaGIC?
No lah. Saja.
How was the app?
Good. Hey, how are you? It's lasted for 2 hours.
But I saw my friend say I heard my friend say it's lagging.
Lagging on his side lah.
LCL already. C 给拦死。
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Microsoft. Thank you, Microsoft. We'll capture some.
Yeah, absolutely. We got my Yeah, absolutely.
Well, man, check it.
Just share it. Alright, great, yeah. Cool. I don't know, man. Like, it could be augmented reality. It could be all sorts of stuff. I have no idea. It could be live video. I mean, it's all fair game right now. I have no idea. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, nice. Yeah, sure. No problem. Thank you.
Very great to see
And then more money to build.
So we get Firechat is the MVP.
Yeah.
Is that your MVP?
That's his MVP. Yeah. So he's just enough.
A few words. Got 85 people talking. 85 people watching.
85 people watching right now. Hi, my name is Warren Liao and I work at MaGIC. We've got this accelerator program that's coming live right now.
So application opens on the 1st of April for a 4-month intake. Be sure to join the ASEAN program. Yeah, me again.
You get a coupon.
I get a coupon.
Got it? Thank you. Hey man, yeah. Yeah, we'll see that. No, now you know. Try it and thanks.
One, two, three.
Yeah, but it's just literally my email. Alright,
What's your number? 72. That's a
no, absolutely not. I went with the flow 100%.